Hi there, Doc from Barcast Audio here today to talk with you about the 5 most common reasons students fail the bar exam. It is so frustrating each year to see intelligent, bright students fail the bar exams for the most common, most recurring reasons. So I want to give you some tips to help you avoid those exact reasons for failing. If you do ultimately fail the bar exam, it will not be because of these most common reasons, because I'm telling you right now how to avoid them in this video. Let's jump right into it. All right, let's start off with the most common reason law students fail the bar exam, and it is very simply, you do not do the work. If you do not do the work, you will not pass. Now, this may sound counterintuitive to some of you, given all you have riding on this exam, but you would be shocked to know how many law students each year simply fail because they don't do all the work assigned to them, provided to them, they give up too early, or they are just simply failing to complete the task put in front of them. Every bar prep company you use, whether it's Barbury, Themis, Barcast Own Services, they're going to give you more than enough materials to pass the bar exam. Only thing stopping you thereafter is actually putting the work in. Now, that is a big wall to jump over, but you need to contextualize your bar prep, not so much as if I can get all this work done, then I will pass. More so in, you have to understand that if you do the work, if you put the work in, you will come out on the other side. If you are working harder, if you are working smarter, or if you are progressing appropriately through this process. Many students struggle with the lack of structure that they have with bar prep programs. Once you are not in a class setting every day, once you're not asked to show up on time to start your studies at a certain set time every day, students often flounder, especially students who may require a more rigid structure to their day. And this becomes a particular problem as we get deeper into bar prep when the structure sort of even pulls away. Most of these bar prep courses, including Barcast's Own, will provide you with a study schedule to give you everything you need, tell you exactly what you need to do each day, each week, each month, what you need to accomplish before exam day. But as we get deeper into bar prep, as you start to personally identify your problem areas, your areas of strength, that's when the structure is going to fall away a bit, and you're going to have to rely on your own knowledge, your own experience as a student to figure out what works for you. Are you somebody who works well with flashcards? Are you somebody who works better with listening to audio? That's something that you're going to have to figure out as we get deeper into bar prep, and that's where a lot of students fail. Once the structure falls away, they start to fall back on, well, I don't even know what I should be doing with my time. I'm not using my time appropriately anymore, and that's where they sort of give up and fall in upon themselves. It's a house of cards. You just have to keep pushing through it, and you have to remember that doing the work is all that separates you from passing. Now, sometimes you may not do the work simply because of personal obligations or something tragic may have happened in your life that's preventing you, and you have to understand that that is perfectly fine. Now, not all students simply stop doing the work because of the lack of structure. Sometimes there are things that happen beyond our control, things in your personal life. Maybe you had a terrible breakup, maybe you're getting a divorce during the bar prep process, and you simply do not have time with everything else going on in your life to commit yourself to bar prep. That is perfectly fine, it is perfectly acceptable, but it further highlights exactly what I'm talking about here. The work is necessary. You need to devote yourself to this process, and there's no real shortcuts around it. If something like that pops up, if you're simply not able to do the work, be honest with yourself early on. Say, I'm gonna give this my best shot. If something does pop up where maybe you can't really devote yourself to what the bar exam prep programs are telling you need to do each day, do what you can, try your best. If the decision is ultimately made where maybe you shouldn't take the test, whether you should withdraw, keep that in mind because it is not necessarily a failure on your part to withdraw if you cannot devote the time and resources necessary. So don't be too hard on yourself if that pops up. But outside of those factors, things beyond our control, I want you to commit yourself right now to not failing the bar exam simply because you did not do the work. You have it in you. No quitting, no vacations during bar prep. Do the work as prescribed, follow your bar prep course, do everything necessary, and you will come out on the other side. As long as you are working smart, working hard, you are capable of passing the bar exam. Let's talk now about the second most common reason law students fail the bar exam, and that is a failure in time management. Now, time management is important on the bar exam in 2 contexts. First, time management is important on the bar exam with regard to your studying, your day-to-day studying. Now, for the most part, each bar exam prep course is going to give you a detailed schedule about how you should be spending your days, how you should be spending your time, how you should be studying each day, each week, each month. But early on in the bar prep process especially, it becomes very important how you are dividing your time, how you are breaking up your individual days. What time are you getting started? What time are you finishing up? Are you actually making the most use of your daytime time? Are you effectively studying within the context of a work day, let's say, an 8-hour study day, let's say? Or are you somebody who can only focus for X number of hours? You can do an hour or so, then you need to take a 50-minute break. You can do another hour. You have to figure out what works for you early on, and you have to manage your time and set your time scheduling appropriately early on in the bar prep process. The most important early lesson in terms of time management with regard to your study schedule is going to be how you're breaking up your days. Are you somebody who focuses better in the morning on your lectures? Are you somebody who maybe needs a little bit of time to get acclimated to the workday, where maybe you're better off reviewing early on in the morning before you actually really, your coffee kicks in, you really lock in so you're ready for those lectures? These are things you're gonna have to figure out early on so that you're making the most of your study days. Are you making the most of your time? Are you using your time effectively? Are you watching all of your lectures at 1.0 speed? Are you watching it at an additional speed, 1.5? I often recommend students try it at 1.5 or even a little quicker so that they can get through their lectures early on and move on to actual active studying, because a lot of times these lectures are just kind of washing upon you, washing over you. You're not taking in the information as you're listening to the lectures. It's only after you go back, after you write down what you actually learned, that you're really committing this stuff to memory. Speaking of active learning, how are you using your time after the lectures? You need to make sure early on that you're actively studying after your lectures. You're doing something, whether that be creating note cards, reviewing commercial bar prep outlines you may have picked up from either your bar prep course or another resource. Maybe you're going to the gym and listening to audio outlines like the ones Barcast provides. You need to be figuring out early on how you're doing something active to study. You need to figure out early on how you're doing something active to commit the information you've learned to memory early on. For example, all of these are going to be really key to figuring out how you manage your study time early on in the bar prep process. Remember, Barcast, our website, all of these questions are going to be really important to figuring out early on how you're going to break up your days, how you're going to avoid failing for the reason of sheer poor time management with regard to your study habits. For example, here at Barcast, we typically recommend students spend the morning listening or watching lectures and thereafter spend the second half of the day doing something active with that information. That is something that we've seen work with a lot of students in the past, but that may not work for you. Figuring out what works in terms of your time management, what you can swing, what is most effective for you personally as a student is going to be key to avoiding failing for some reason related to time management with regard to your study schedule. Now, I mentioned that time management crops up in two contexts. First, it is with regard to studying. We went over that now, and now we're going to move on to the second context, which is time management with regard to the exam itself. I'm talking about students who often fail to move on from one MBE question to another, move on from one essay to another, who are not finishing their exams on time as they're taking practice ones, who are running out of time, who are up against under the gun on each of their essays every time they do this. That is going to be one of the most important, most challenging elements of the bar exam. And if you do fail, now the issue of not finishing your question creates an abundance of problems, most notably in that it leaves you without an opportunity to score points on other additional questions. So questions where maybe you're struggling with one question and you just can't figure it out, so you spend too much time on it. Now you're under the gun against questions that may be more in your wheelhouse. Sometimes you simply need to move on to maximize points. And what we don't want to do in this context of the exam is leave points on the board for questions that you might have scored better on. You don't want to devote too much time to any one question at the expense of another question where you're leaving a lot of points on the board just sheerly because of time management issues. So that's going to be the most important context where this comes up on the exam itself. Remember, for the multiple choice on the bar exam, you're only allotted 1.8 minutes for each MBE question and typically around 30 minutes for each MEE essay on the uniform bar exam, as well as 90 minutes for each MPT essay on the multi-state performance test. Now that obviously breaks down a little bit differently if you're taking a state-specific bar exam. For example, in California, I believe most of your essays you're gonna have 1 hour each. Florida, I know you have 1 hour each on those essays as well. They're gonna be longer, more detailed essays that invoke a few more topics all at once, whereas the UBE essays are gonna be a little bit more focused. Now, while those numbers may not ever be exact in terms of how you're spending your time on the exam itself, they are a good baseline to keep in mind as you're moving through your questions. You shouldn't be spending 5 minutes on any one multiple choice question just because you're putting yourself under the gun against questions Now, while you may not end up spending that exact amount of time on those questions on the actual exam, they are a good baseline to follow to keep in mind as you're moving through your questions on the exam. Just keep them in mind. Don't get too stuck on any one question. You shouldn't spend 5 minutes on any one multiple choice question, or if you do, just move on because you don't want to put yourself under the gun question down the line and leave leave some points on the board simply because you ran out of time. The number one way we have, so how do you actually avoid failing for this reason? How do you avoid failing for time management with regard to the exam itself? Simply put, you have to take practice exams. You have to take exam questions under timed conditions. Practice makes perfect with this. It seems intuitive, but too often students are just like, I don't want to take a timed exam. I don't want to take a timed multiple choice set. I don't want to take timed essay questions, especially. But unfortunately, you're never going to be quite comfortable on the bar exam. It's simply the way the exam is organized, the way it breaks down. You're never going to feel entirely comfortable. But the only way to really get over these time management issues, to avoid failing for a complete failure in time management, is to actually practice exam questions under timed conditions. Do that and you will avoid this second most common reason for failing. That brings us to our third most common reason for students failing the bar exam. That is not doing enough practice questions. Now, practice questions are a bit of a point of contention amongst the bar exam studying community, and the main reason for this is simply that students often don't know how to appropriately use practice questions as a study tool. The biggest issue I see with students with regard to practice questions is that students simply fear failure. They don't want to do practice sets early on. They don't want to perform practice questions under time conditions because they fear that they will feel small, they will feel dumb because they got a question wrong or they bombed a practice question set. Well, what they're really doing there and what they're failing to see is that each failed question, each problem that you do not get correct is an opportunity to build yourself up, to build up your knowledge base in preparation for the bar exam. Every time you avoid doing those questions, like let's say you feel that you need to build up your knowledge of the law before jumping into questions, it is simply an avoidant behavior. You're not trying to. This fear of failure often leads students to simply delay in doing practice questions. They're waiting and waiting and waiting deep into the practice process to feel like they have a real grasp of the law, quote unquote, real grasp of the law before they dive into their practice questions. That is not what you should be doing here. Do not do that because it will not prepare you adequately for the bar exam. You need to do practice questions on the bar exam. It is an integral part of your study process. For this reason, the way we always tell students to avoid failing for a lack of doing enough practice questions is to start with practice questions early and often. That means practice essays. That means practice multiple choice sets. That means practice MPTs. You need to do this because that is what the actual exam is. Once again, it seems obvious, but you would be shocked how often students are avoiding this and they're waiting till they really grasp the law deep in the process to start with these practice questions. So don't do that. Start your practice questions early and often and make sure you're using them appropriately. We'll record some more videos on how to really do multiple choice questions, how to really use practice questions as a tool for your studying, but just remember, don't blindly do these questions. Break down all your wrong answers. Make sure you're making the most out of every opportunity you have with a wrong answer to build up your knowledge base and prepare yourself for the exam. This brings us to number 4, our number 4 most common reason for failing the bar exam, and that is doing too many practice questions. Now, I know this is a bit of a trick because I just told you that not doing enough practice questions can often lead to failure, but so too can doing too many practice questions. And now here he is saying that doing too many also lead to failure, and that's contradictory. He shouldn't be saying that. Well, unfortunately, the law is contradictory. You're gonna have to get over it, I'm afraid, because doing too many practice questions can just as easily lead to unfavorable results when it comes to bar exam time. Now, when I'm talking about doing too many practice questions, the issue I'm really talking about is twofold. First of all, students often mistakenly believe that doing practice questions by themselves and simply just going over the answers is sufficient to actively study the material. But what students are lacking in doing that, what they're failing to do, is to put any active effort into learning from their mistakes. What makes practice questions really useful is that they point out to students explicitly what areas of the law they know, they kinda know, and they don't know at all. And that is a very, very, very useful thing, especially when you are somebody who is tasked with learning so much information for the bar exam. And that's why I always recommend students write out a wrong answer book, which has them write out the full rule statements for not only the multiple choice questions they get wrong, but also the multiple choice questions they get right, but they're not completely entirely sure about. Now, this sounds time consuming, but the alternative is simply to have students go over their questions blindly without moving into the nuances of why they got the questions wrong. You don't want to commit a wrong rule of law to memory simply because you got lucky on a multiple choice question sometime before your exam. When exam day comes, we cannot leave things like that to luck. So commit even these medium knowledge answers to memory by writing them in your wrong answer book. Now, the second way where I see doing too many practice questions causing students to fail the bar exam is with students who do too many practice questions and start to overthink questions where they actually know the rule of law. This often happens more often closer to the exam after you've done a ton of practice questions. We see students who start seeing trick answers and trick questions where there simply are none. They don't think an answer could be so simple. They don't trust their gut because they believe that they're being tricked over and over again by the bar examiners. Now, this is a risk you run when you're doing so many practice questions ahead of the exam. For some students, this may be helpful, this process of doing too many questions, but you have to keep in mind what kind of exam taker you are. Are you somebody who may get into this negative mental space where you're constantly seeing shadows where there are none, where you're constantly seeing trick answers around every corner? Because if you are, you may need to keep that in mind as we get closer to the exam. You may need to be somebody who pulls back a little bit on these practice questions, who accepts that some questions may simply be straightforward and easy and are not going to have 3 trick answers, 3 trick questions, 3 tricks within the fact pattern itself. The key to avoiding this is being active in how you're grading yourself throughout the bar exam process. I will say that more often than not, students who do have that wrong answer book, who are writing out a lot of their wrong and maybe could have been wrong questions or answers, they are not students who run into this problem simply because there's not enough time in the day to write out their answers, commit them to memory, and do 5,000 multiple choice questions. They are people who are building up their knowledge base. They're building up the areas of the law where they may be lacking. So they don't have time necessarily to fall into this trap where they're seeing trick answers on every question. This is particularly bad with students who use some of the bigger box bar prep courses because a lot of their fake written out questions, they are written themselves, the courses, they tend to be a little trickier than the official NBE questions. So keep that in mind as you're moving through and make sure you're thoughtful in how you're grading and how you're taking multiple choice questions and practice questions as you get closer to the exam. Now, the fifth and final most common reason that students fail the bar exam is simply bad luck. Your car broke down, your significant other broke up with you, you had a death in the family. I mentioned this, I touched on this in the first common reason for failing the bar exam, but bad luck is something that simply pops up. We cannot account for these things. So that's why it's so important that you account for the first 4 most common reasons that I discussed earlier here. Bad luck is not something you can really plan for when it comes to the bar exam. Life happens, unfortunately for us who are so singularly committed to taking the bar exam. People have children. You may have children as you're watching this. You may understand that, listen, if something happens with your child, you cannot focus your entire life on studying for an exam. You may be completely prepared, completely committed to taking the exam, and something terrible may pop up in the days leading up to it. These are things we simply cannot account for. They are an unfortunate reality of the bar prep process. They pop up every year, every bar exam cycle. So all you can do, all you can attempt to do is to avoid the previous most common reasons we talked about. Because listen, this is something that's unavoidable, and to the best of your ability, you try to make your own luck, and you make your own luck by doing the things that we discussed earlier in this video, by reviewing your outlines, by listening to audio courses while you're driving, by making the most out of your study time. That does it for us here. Be sure to check out barcastaudio.com for audio outlines, essay attack sheets, all the materials you need to pass the bar exam and make your next bar exam your last bar exam. Do not take this test again. Until then, I'll talk to you soon. Remember, Barcast Audio. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for more of these videos. Until then, I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye now.